How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today I have the pleasure to be talking to Tad Stones, a legend. How are you, sir?
I'm good, doing well.
Thank you
Nicely
so
air conditioned as the world goes burning outside my window.
Thank you so much for being here. And not just for being here, I have a couple of things to thank you for. Uh, I know everybody thanks you for Darkwing Duck. Thank you so much for that. But also have to thank you for things like Chippendale Rescue Rangers and my one of my brother's favorite, if not his very favorite, which was the Adventures of the Gummy Bears. But personally, I shared a story behind before we went live, but this piece right here that you did for my daughter 15 years ago. You didn't we sent this in to get signed because we thought it'd be really cool. To get this sign for my daughter because it was coming out, and then my buddy Ben was like, "Oh, well, he does sketches," and I was like, "Well, to my surprise, this came in and it says, Lydia, use your power for good." So we've had this before she was even born. So that is so awesome. So thank you so much for that.
I could foresee that she was to be a force for justice. She just needed the right encouragement. So I'm glad I was there.
She's doing all right. She's doing all right. So how are you, sir? How is California treating you?
Good, little warm these days, but still relatively healthy. I think I'm totally recovered from San Diego Comic-Con that I was at last weekend.
Yeah.
Courtesy of Dynamite Comics, actually.
Mm-hmm.
They got me a hotel room for the night so I could be on the panel the next day. Although usually when I go down, I just stay with the grandkids who happen to live in San Diego. So this year I just did 2 days, which was enough time to basically see all the people I see only at conventions and catch up with everybody. And then the panel was great. Met a lot of the other artists that they do, not just on Darkwing, but the other villains comics that they do, is it Sue Lee who does Maleficent? Just gorgeous work. So
yes,
it was cool.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, or for anybody that's not familiar with your work. How did you first get into the field of animation, and how did that transition into comics, and then we'll definitely talk about this collection that Dynamite is putting out, the Darkwing Duck complete graphic novel collection that they kickstarted. So yeah, tell me about your work, because I mentioned Gummy Bears, I mentioned Darkwing Duck and Chippendale Rescue Rangers.
Yeah. Gummy Bears was created by Jim Magon and Art Patello. Mm-hmm. And Art knew plenty about animation. Jim was new to it, but Art says, no, this is the way I want to see a script written, in terms of the kind of direction you want to give to an artist to build on and all that. And they kind of concocted that world, Jim taking the lead. I came in third season, that was for NBC. Third season they wanted a change, so I stepped in, rewrote the Bible just to expand the idea. It's just simple things like making Dunwin on a trade route. Again, I just look for, what can I put in here, because the Bible is the document that you hand to writers and creators and to give them an idea of what you're looking for. And you're also supposed to give them the idea of, or give them jumping off points for more stories. So doing something like, hey, Dunwin's on a trade route, suddenly it's like, oh, well, people are going to be coming in from different countries, from the spice trade or whatever. It's just, it was that kind of thing, because obviously the show had 2 seasons, characters were set and all that. So that's what I was on for that season. And then when it went to the Disney afternoon, Mark Seidenberg and Rich Fogel were the 2 story editors who then took that and expanded the rest of the episodes they needed to, do 65 episodes, which was the package you needed to go out to syndication back then.
65 episodes is that considered a season?
That was, well, you see, here's the difference, at least at Disney back then. I mean, the syndication market was just coming to fruition. It was suddenly being a big thing. Before that, it was just Saturday morning as the place to find cartoons. That, and there was usually a lunchtime or a morning show in local markets where a sheriff or a clown or some other character would, show old cartoons, old theatrical shorts and things like that. It was Hanna-Barbera who did some of the first stuff directly made for television with Rough and Ready. And I think, did Jay Ward do Crusader Rabbit? Again, a limited animation style that allowed animation to be done here in this country, but at a TV budget. So that's what I kind of grew up with. So 65 episodes by the time syndication, came around, is basically 13 weeks of 5 episodes each. And that was considered the minimum number to make that you could then repeat over and over and over again. And kids would stay interested for a couple of years, until younger kids came up. That Darkwing got 91 episodes because while we were doing those 65, ABC heard about the show. They wanted 13 episodes, and they wanted 13 different episodes.
Okay.
So that was great for us. So we got to do 13 more stories. And the real nice thing is they were allowed to pick from what we had in work. We didn't show them everything at once because it would be unfair to the syndication, stations to have somebody else pick out all the best episodes. So we showed some storyboards to them, some scripts, some little bit of footage, and only a few at a time. And they had the choice was, you either say yes or no. If you say no, this goes away. You can't get to the end of the picks and say, well, we want that one back there. No, you got to. So it worked out well that we didn't have to take any notes from them. They just had to take what we gave them. Then they wanted a second season, and that I had to do with the normal network routine of, here are the premises we'd like to do. They choose ones that seem interesting to them, and then they gave notes along the way. But still, we turned out good episodes. It wasn't like suddenly we're, squeezed into a terrible lack of creativity.
So how did this adventure even begin for you? Because one of the cool things about you that I'm sure a lot of people realize is that you were trained under Eric Larson. Now, of course, there's a comic book creator named Eric Larson, but that's with a K.
Different guy. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is one of the 9 old men, like one of the 9 old men from Disney that trained you. And how did that even happen? Did you were you at school one day and you were like, I think I want to be a storyteller?
Well, I'll try to be fast because this can take up the whole show.
No, I'm here to listen.
Basically, my dad had wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist, like an editorial cartoonist. He graduated from USC right in the Depression, when it was more about feeding your face instead of feeding your dreams. So anyway, he ended up going to advertising. He tried to do a little, in his spare time, but, was unsuccessful. And as soon as he started having kids, there goes your time. So, however, what I inherited were not only a bunch of art books that he had, but he had some books on animation. He had the famous artist cartoonist course, which is had some of the classic cartoonists. This is back when comic strip artists were on the cover of Time magazine. These guys were huge, like Milt Caniff, who did Terry and the Pirates, and Steve Canyon and Al Cap, Little Abner. Those guys had plays made and TV shows or movie serials done about their characters. So it was like a huge deal. And comic books were like a step down kind of feeling.
We still feel like that with the MCU and everything.
Well, it's like, but it's so the difference is, I think a syndicated comic strip, the guy got a better cut of profits than, Jack Kirby turning out pages and pages. And it's like, hey, thanks for all the work, and the creative ideas you've done, and we own them now.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had all those books. So I always knew that there was a behind the scenes on this stuff. It wasn't a mystery. I loved cartooning in general, and I loved animation, what I saw on television, and loved the episodes of the Disneyland TV show where Walt went behind the scenes and showed how animation worked and special effects and animation.
Hmm.
Um, Walter Lantz had a syndicated Woody Woodpecker show, and he'd do drawings and stuff like that. So I just ate that stuff up. However, as I grew up, about in high school, I just figured that, and somewhere along the lines, I was reading Silver Age comics, and then Marvel Comics started, and I was collecting those. But I really wanted to be in animation, but my feeling was, look, the only place worth working at, in other words, to me, doing full animation is Disney, because they were doing movies that came out once every 5 years or so.
Well,
And they've
so
got, and basically they have all their guys. So it was like, my feeling was, there's the only place to work, and it's like a closed door.
okay, so we're talking about like
That would have been in
70s,
this, yeah,
right?
this late 60s, basically.
Late 60s, okay.
And yeah, because I went to college in 1970, 74.
I'm not trying to age you. I was just trying to.
It's okay. It's pretty evident in the face.
No. It's just that whenever you said they were pumping out movies every 5 years, I was like, oh yeah, one time they were doing them.
That was it. Yeah.
Every year, and then they took a break, and then there was the Renaissance, and then there
was no break. That's how long it took them to do the film. The department, the Disney animation department, when I started there was, I believe, not counting ink and paint, was like 55 people. 55, that's just 55 people turning out Robin Hood or Aristocats and whatever. And when I got there, they were working on the first Rescuers. And I actually have one scene. I have a scene in the Rescuers.
Yeah, I knew about that, and yeah. I knew about the oh my gosh, Fox and the Hound.
Yeah, so the basically I found out that it turned out I was kind of accurate in what I thought was going on, except that while I was in high school, and certainly when I got to college, they decided we're going to do more of these. Robin Hood made a lot of money. In those days, it was like $6 million domestic. It was like a huge hit. So they started a training program, which was basically a lot of the 9/11 men and a few other, key people like Ken Anderson and Claude Clotes, and would look at portfolios that came in and decide, oh, let's give this guy a shot. This person seems to have a knack for something. And then you had like 4 weeks to do an animated test, whether you knew about animation before going in or not. You had to learn it and do it within 4 weeks, just getting notes from Eric, and Eric taking you through things. And if you survived that, you had another 4 weeks. And if you survived that, you went in production as an in-betweener. Basically, I found out about
people that don't know what in-betweeners are. I think this is, to me, it's like the people that make the magic. So who better
to
if you look,
is basically you think of and maybe people don't remember what you've certainly seen a drawing of what a piece of film used to look like. So you have a bunch of films, it's like a flip book. If you look at it very closely in motion, they look like the same picture, but if you really look at them, you realize, oh, that thing is moving. So if an arm's here and then goes to here, these would be called like throwing something. This and this would be an extreme. And then you do a breakdown, might be here, or maybe higher up here. And then all the drawings you need between here and there have to be done by an in-betweener. And if you put a bunch of drawings close together, things move slower. If you put them farther apart, it goes faster. So when you want to throw something and you do that, well, you start with what's called a slow in, a few more drawings there, and then you space them out, and then it's all the way out, and then a bunch of drawings here in the rest pose. But that spacing is what makes the magic, basically, of animation. But that's basically determined by the animator. He'll do a little chart at the edge of a scene. So
And
basically, I found
that is the difference in comics too. Like in comics, your brain makes up the motion. So as Mr. Stones was saying, like your brain is the in-betweener in a way, because if you see a panel with somebody, let's use the baseball again, like throwing a baseball here, and then the next panel, the ball is going through a window, your brain immediately fills in
yeah,
those blanks. And that's, and
and
that,
with
I think
and with
it's so cool though.
yeah, and with comics, you don't have to. You could show a guy winding up, and then a shot of a ball crashing through a window,
Mhm.
and you know what's happened. And then comics have cheats that I at one point I thought, well, that's not realistic, and then I said, no, that's the type of thing you embrace. Speaking of slugging somebody, if Spider-Man slugged Dr. Octopus or something, while there was that panel of his arm smacking into his jaw, he was like, there's a word balloon of like quips and jokes in there, and it's like there's no way there's no way you could do that in the space of hitting someone, but that you can anyway embrace as a strength of comics, something you can't do in another medium, where comics can show action and freeze time at in the same drawing. Um, and the point is that quip added to Spider-Man's personality and made it more interesting or more entertaining than just a bunch of panels of people slugging each other. Anyway, that training program, I happened to find out about it because my girlfriend's suite mate at college uh, was the daughter of Exitencio, who is one of the layout artists and then became a ride designer at WED, which now you'd know as Imagineering.
Oh
So
yeah.
if it wasn't for that, I would not have heard about this training program at all. I've got the number of the guy to call. I called just for information, and the guy said, "Okay, why don't you come in next Thursday or whatever it was?" And it was like, "Oh, I didn't say no, but I wasn't even an art major then. I'd been an art major for 1 year, and then because of my writing, my English teachers wanted me to go into writing, and then they came up with this new major called humanities, and I looked at it and said, "Oh, this is a way to do art and writing." And as it worked out, took a bunch of old English courses, never did a writing course, and all the art courses I did were like 3D, like sculpture and ceramics and all that. Although
Mhm.
ceramics worked out because when I found out I had to come up with a portfolio, I was a TA in ceramics, and the teacher had just taken over the art department because the lead was on sabbatical. And he loved Disney, and he could do the goofy yell, which he would uh, demonstrate in the echoing ceramics building. Uh, anyway, he got it so I could, go in and sit in on life drawing classes, build some of those drawings, and basically it all came together, and I survived enough to get in the review board. They let me in, and I started basically at that training program 3 days after graduation. Um, so, and bonus, I married that girlfriend. She's now my wife.
To
Um,
this day, way to lock
to
that
this
down.
day, exactly,
She brought you some good luck. That's awesome.
exactly. More than that, 3 kids too, and 3 grandchildren.
Wonderful.
So it all pays off. Uh, anyway, so that's basically how I got into Disney, and then at features, I got a scene in The Rescuers. I did You had to get ahead and doing personal tests in your spare time. I came in like 5 months after Ron Clements, who, if you know animation, is writer and along with John Musker and director of Little Mermaid, Aladdin,
Mhm.
Princess and the Frog, Hercules. Uh, Fantastic stuff. And then 3 months before, Glenn Keane was like one of the top animators of all time. Uh, so anyway, while I was working on that, I realized I was having more enjoyment creating tests of characters to figuring out what they were going to do instead of actually executing it. Although the actual act of animation was fun, and they let me move it into story. And then for a while, they didn't know where to put me, and I did I wrote and produced an educational film which was animated by an old assistant of John Lounsbury, who was one of the 9 old men. That was my first credit, but that had full animation done down there. And then because I had done this educational thing, I got moved to, again, what is now Imagineering, to design rides at Epcot Center. So I worked with, incredibly talented people over there. Tony Baxter was like one of the chief designers, of Disneyland, in the later years anyway. Anyway, and then when TV animation came around, there was about a year and a half where I don't know why I got a paycheck, because I'm not sure anybody knew what I was doing. But then the regime change happened. Michael Eisner came in, and TV animation was very important to him. So it was like the Sunday of his first week there. So the end of his first week there, he had a bunch of people over to his house, like 11 of us or something. And the people putting that group together, I had impressed by doing some, in a short amount of time, not only pitching ideas, I actually had worked out the story and had done a concept storyboard on the stories. And they said, we need that guy there. So I was in at that first meeting, and 9 months later, I went over to TV animation. Technically was on the executive side at beginning with creative manager was my title. And I was supposed to bring in all the writers and people like that. And there was 2 things wrong with that idea. One, I had been to Disney my entire career, so I didn't know any outside writer, and nobody told me, no, here's a list of agents. You're supposed to call these people. People would kind of come through and ask who to talk to, and they'd end up with me. But the other thing was, I didn't know how things worked. And the idea that, wait, you're going to do all this work without getting paid? That doesn't seem right. That's what you do. You have to come up with the show that you're going to pitch and all of that. Anyway, we had a gong show where they go through short pitches, like a couple lines, and we pitched like 22 things. I think Megan came up with 4 to 6 of them, and all the rest were mine. And a lot were throwaways and tossed things. But it's just like, I was just generating ideas. And then while I was developing things like that, that's when they wanted to make the switch in gummy bears. And suddenly I was on the creative side officially.
And that changed everything for you.
Yeah, because one, I felt more comfortable. It's like, no, this is what I like to do. And even, who knows, had I stayed at features, what would have happened. I probably should have stayed in animation, not even gone into story. But really, instead of working on one story for 4 years, I liked working on one concept, a lot of different stories, So basically, here are these bears in kind of a medieval setting, and magic is in the world, and all of that. And you've got to come up with 13 stories, or actually more than that, because a lot of them were 11 minutes long. And then after that, we pitched Rescue Rangers.
So yeah, let's talk about this, because I'm at that age where I was watching things like Gummy Bears, and then that evolved into something that became to us the Disney Afternoon. Like, there was at one time no Disney Afternoon. Now it's kind of a staple of kids from the 90s and of course 80s that watched it. What I mean, there was always cartoons, right? So, cartoons after school to keep us glued to the TV, to sell us toys, to tell us stories. Didn't matter. There was always cartoons. There were certain blocks, but it seems interesting that there wasn't a Disney Afternoon.
The television landscape was entirely different, though, back then. There weren't a lot of cartoons in the syndication market until the toy companies kind of got involved with Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe ultimately. And then you go through all these things, ridiculous ideas that became shows, but they sold a lot of toys. And Saturday morning was much the same. It started getting very commercialized until, an association of parents got involved and said, hey, maybe we should put some rules and restrictions on this, which people can argue, for and against, but, for at least not having the shows being blatant commercials. Although, even though Transformers or GoBots for that matter weren't commercials, if you didn't have the toy line behind it, maybe you'd have less than 36 robots as your lead characters, or whatever number. I think it was actually more than that. They wouldn't constantly have different vehicles showing up. Anyway, so it was kind of a different world back then, and DuckTales had been a huge hit.
Yeah. So
when they created
what
that.
what spun into DuckTales? Like how
Well, they
I
were
was
looking for
curious
things to do, and I think it was Ken Kuntz and Dave Weimers were a writing team back then,
Mhm.
and they said, "Hey, there's this guy Carl Barks who's
Yeah.
done all this. He's created a world and all that," and that got them interested. And eventually, they hired the story editors of the number one show, which was The Smurf. That was Ted and Nasty and Patsy Cameron.
Mhm.
Jim Megan was pulled in. Dave and Ken, I think, still worked on a lot. But the nice thing about Ted and Patsy were more oriented to the short. Well, they did the Smurfs, so that was kind of their natural humor, was a little more silly. I remember one of the first characters they pitched was the Lobster Mobster, and I'm thinking, very Carl Barks. But DuckTales was a huge hit, and I don't know that anybody can say, oh, it's a huge hit in spite of something or because of something, or the blend. Because what Jim Magon brought to it were, especially the 5-part openers that they did, he brought the big Carl Barks adventure to it and really broke things down. And I think it was the mix of those two things that created what we know as DuckTales.
And Carl was still
And the
alive.
world went woohoo. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
didn't get to meet him, but some of the artists did. Mike Perazzo,
Oh
became
my!
friends with him and all of
I'm a
that.
huge Mike
So
Perazzo fan. I
yeah,
have a print upstairs. So I have loved Duck comics. I found them later in life. I was in high school, but what really brought me to them was to even try out was, of course, DuckTales. Like I grew up with that stuff, and then eventually Darkwing Duck. And now they're a big part of my life. I mean, it's crazy how it's still a big part of kids' lives. So my kids watched the new one that just came out. Well, I say just came out, but I'm sure it's
yeah,
5-6 years
2017.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, was it really 2017? Oh
Yeah,
my
we
gosh.
often refer to it as DuckTales 2017. That's the new one.
Yeah, that one. So it feels like it just came out, and it's like it's never going away, and I love it because that sense of adventure, like you said about Carl Barks, is always to me is there. And then of course the Don Rosa, well, I think actually ended up writing one episode of Tailspin, if I'm not mistaken. But how did Darkwing spin out of DuckTales? Like, because you do have
It actually
Launchpad, so
It actually didn't. Although, if you read some of the early things, we call it a spinoff of DuckTales. And people have tried to, when I say, well, it wasn't really a spinoff, people bring up that document. And it's like,
to prove you
and
wrong.
I say, guys, DuckTales was like a huge mega hit. Of course, they're going to call it a spinoff. They're trying to sell the new show. No, actually, it came from a title of a DuckTales episode called Double O Duck, which was an episode that had Launchpad as a James Bond spy. Michael and Jeffrey, meaning Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, loved what they considered intriguing titles or fun titles. We pitched Rescue Rangers, strangely enough, started with a pitch also from Ken Kuntz and Dave Weimers called Miami Mice, because Miami Vice was a huge hit. And they loved the title immediately. And they said, what are they going to do? Find drugs? And they said, no, cheese. These are the executives talking to each other. Anyway, that got it going. We quickly changed the title to, and I don't know whether legal department stepped in or we just said, come on, let's get realistic. We don't want to get in trouble. And we called it Metro Mice. And actually we did a pilot script introduced Fat Cat, as a matter of fact. But I have art of that initial pitch where they're holding guns, not rubber dart guns, actually guns. I go, what were we thinking, you know? But we quickly ran up against a wall of what kind of, we can't just do cop shows, because if you look at cop shows, they're generally about violence, or, you know, just can't keep robbing jewelry stores or cheese factories, you know, or whatever. So we needed to expand the idea. And Jim Megan and I worked closely on this to come up with a concept that eventually I came up with the name on a drive to Northern California of Rescue Rangers. And it was just like, oh, that's just open-ended. They help animals in trouble. They help little kids in trouble. It's the idea that they, you know, step into any perilous situation to help out somebody in need. The leader of the pack was Kit Colby, and Gadget was in it. There was a Monterey Jack type character who was a kangaroo rat from Australia. We had Chirp Sing in Asian cricket, a chameleon named Camille, who was kind of the secretary. She could blend in any background. She could do plaid, but it hurt. And they rode around on a big, giant, nearsighted eagle with big horn glasses. Anyway, had a piece of artwork, kind of pitched that to Michael and Jeffrey at the same meeting where we pitched, because I was told we need new characters for DuckTales. So we don't just say, we're doing more DuckTales. They say, no, and introducing, so I pitched an alien duck or space duck. I don't remember any, I just went for cliches, basically. A little caveman duck. I said, this is Bubba Duck.
Bubba Duck.
Drawing of that, yeah. Had a little drawing of a guy, you know, with a club. And it didn't say much about him because pretty much the name and the visual sold it. And then I said, and of course, we know the huge hit from last summer. I flipped over a card and I said, Robo Duck. And they laughed at that because it was, you know, and I actually had named him Fenton Crackshell in the copy as we pitched it. Again, Dave Kuntz, David Weimers, I think were huge guys in developing his personality, adding in living with his mom and all of that. But this was basically Robo Duck, which is, by the way, why he has an R on his chest instead of a G. Because somewhere along the line, yeah, they changed the name to Gizmo Duck, which I think is a better name anyway.
I mean,
fitting the series, yeah.
I can't. I mean, that's the name I've always known him as, so I can't.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Right.
When I was initially talking about the story and I said RoboDuck, all these fans said, like, he doesn't even know anything. He doesn't even have the name right. It's like, that's how he started, dudes.
You had to explain yourself to people. I love it.
That is fandom. I used to be part of that kind of fandom, saying like, Human Torch is made of fire. He does not have a fiery coating. And Iceman, originally drawn by Jack Kirby and inked by Chick Stone, you could see through him. He was transparent. It wasn't an icy coating. So I don't remember talking that way, but my brain did.
That's my nerd voice when I make fun of like
exactly.
Actually the thing has blue eyes and not green eyes, you know. But exactly. You're right. There is a certain thing that just makes us
but that's, you know, again, that's part of fandom, you know, and I'd let go of things, and again, because I grew up with the Silver Age, continuity doesn't mean a whole lot to me, and which drove people crazy with Darkwing Duck. They keep trying to, and again, this adds to the fun of the fan trying to piece together a coherent story when we were just making up stuff. Anyway, in that meeting about Rescue Rangers, they liked the show concept, but they didn't like the lead character. And I even said, "Are you sure? Maybe I just didn't pitch him right." And which is a stupid thing to say to your boss, instead of just saying, "Yes, I will fix it." And they said, "No, we got those guys," basically pointing to the drawings of RoboDuck and Bubba Duck. We got them in a sentence. You know, that's what we need here. The meeting went on, and we talked about, because again, DuckTales is a huge hit, other possible spin-offs of the classic character. Mickey was still deemed too precious until we could guarantee that animation would be up to snuff. Donald had already kind of been in DuckTales. Again, the thinking was he's so hard to animate. Again, you're talking about, guys running the department who really loved animation, and they're seeing this animation from the 1940s in their head, and it's like, yeah, we're not there yet. Where DuckTales obviously wasn't at that level. And then Goofy, it was like, yeah, Goofy's been everybody. He's literally was treated as an everyman character. There used to be hundreds of Goofs, in the old cartoons. So he went into development as a detective, as all sorts of things. But when they got to Chip and Dale, it was Michael Eisner who said, put those guys in that show. And Jeffrey said, home run.
Really
Because Jeffrey said, he says, Tad, we like the show. It's just not a home run yet. And as soon as Michael Eisner said, put those chipmunks in that show, Jeffrey said, home run. And we were off and going.
That's all it took. So, okay. I have seen this on the internet and I wanted to hear it from you. Are the clothing of Chip and Dale obviously, maybe it's obvious, based on Magnum PI and Indiana Jones?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The Chip, again, Kit Colby was the lead character. So we're always reusing things. Like Kit used to have that flight jacket that Chip wears. So that was already part of the visual. I don't know who put the hat on him originally. And I worried that it was like too on the nose because we wanted that adventurous side that Indiana Jones. So that's kind of the yes. The Dale, I just naturally took, now Aloha shirts are much more part of normal wear, at least on the West Coast, than they were perhaps back then. But it was like, oh, Dale's going to be the goofier one, and so Hawaiian shirt just seems like the way to go on him. The color stylist gave me samples of different colors, and I picked, I want the bright red shirt, looks best with them and their colors and all that. Now Magnum PI was on the air, and I believe someone asked me, a reporter or somebody like that, in an interview, and that's when I made the allusion. So it was after the fact. It wasn't like Magnum PI is such a hit. You know what makes that a hit? I think it's the shirt. It's the shirt. We're going to use the shirt. That and the hat. Can we give people a whip? Is that too much?
No. As a creator, as a designer and animator, I'm sure sometimes subconsciously everybody does it, right? Like I'm sure subconsciously there's inspiration from something, and without even thinking about it, you're like, oh, maybe.
Well, it wasn't like yeah. There was nothing. It's not like it gave him a mustache. There was nothing about the Magnum PI show that
right.
Feed. You could say Indiana Jones' Big Adventure, and just as a overall concept, that made sense. A detective show on CBS or whatever did not have the same, storytelling inspiration for us. It was purely because I wanted him in a goofy Hawaiian shirt. It's red, and then it visually we could talk about both of them. But it was really once it's a PR thing, it's like you don't get away from it. You let people run with it because it's something else for them to write on. I worried about Zipper's name, because Zipper was a fly.
Yeah.
Your pants fly, Zipper. I remember my son as an adult, when I was talking about, stuff and saying the same thing, he went, oh yeah. And it was like,
well,
a fly zips around. Yeah, a fly zips around. So it was really more like that. But Zipper, fly, pants fly. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about Darkwing. How did this come about? You mentioned an episode, Double O Duck.
It was so again, Rescue Rangers came from Miami Vice,
right?
And then it became Chip, and didn't sell until it was Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers. It started with Double O Duck, but the whole point was marching orders was it can't be Launchpad. The whole point is to come up with a new character.
Oh, so you wanted to use Launchpad from the beginning? Is that right?
No, that was literally in the first conversation with Jeffrey. Was you can't use, you know, it's Double O Duck is not Launchpad McQuack. Yeah, they
okay.
just wanted the title. That's all it was. We played around with him, and he was always like in the periphery of a lot of the pitches. It was like having, you know, a character actor who's you're working for your studio helping out. I think for a while we put in Gizmo Duck was played with. But anyway, whatever the first pitch I did was just I was not inspired. It was just a straight James Bond parody. This is before Austin Powers did it in a more clever way. But Jeffrey just looked at it and says, basically felt the same way I did. He was not inspired by it. He said, this has no sense of family. It's got no Disney heart. Luckily, because, you know, like last year it occurred to me, oh, the normal thing is to say, I'm going to get somebody else on this. Instead, he told me to do it over. So I did. I had to, you know,
how many times have you heard that in your career? Do it over.
Well, not on a show pitch usually. Usually, well, I mean, in theory, Rescue Rangers was that until it was solved in the same meeting. Anyway, I had to take it, you know, seriously. And back then, our staff, story editors and staff writers were on term contracts instead of show contracts. So instead of we're hiring you to work on this show, it's like, no, we're hiring you to work for us for this many years with an option for another year or whatever, which meant you could bring people in to brainstorm and all that. So I brought in a bunch of guys who I eventually wanted on the show anyway. And the piece of art that had been generated was basically generic Disney duck. It could have been Donald, but he was in a white tuxedo and wearing a mask, a hat, and a cape.
Okay, so you added the cape.
Yeah, I don't know why, because it seems weird for me. I wish I had taken notes at the time. Okay. But a key point, what gave it heart, is we started playing around with what if he had a daughter, so that he's torn between, you know, being a dad and being this hero spy or whatever. So it was kind of like, well, he needs a secret identity, which you don't usually use in a spy, or if a spy does in a live action film, it just gives a different name, has a fake ID. But in a cartoon, it was like, oh, he needs a mask. Anyway, Bob Klein was the artist who did you know, this generic duck, white tuxedo, mask, hat, and cape. And then one of the story editors in the room, Dwayne Capizzi, who had done Alf and later on Jackie Chan Adventures and Men in Black, and currently I think he's doing a Transformers project. He said, you know, with that mask and tuxedo, he looks more like a pulp hero, like Green Hornet or the Shadow. And that I love, because, you know, I was as old as I am. I'm not that old, but I knew all about the old radio dramas because comic book fandom and old radio and pulp magazines, it all blended, you know, in magazines and any conventions that you might have gone to. And I'd heard the old radio shows, and obviously it's like, oh, the Shadow, this is getting good now. So we developed the show closer to what it is, enough that, okay, you've got a show, let's go out and pitch it, let's go out and sell it. And so, you know, a few months later, there's a double page spread in Variety, the trade papers of Hollywood, that showed this masked duck in a tuxedo called Double O Duck. And the people who actually own the rights to James Bond, it's like they didn't write any letters when it was an episode, because everybody did like a spy parody episode. But the idea, as they're trying to re-energize the live action Bond, they did not want to have this cartoon duck.
There was a cartoon at that time too, right? James Bond Jr., I think.
I forget whether that came earlier or after, but obviously that one had to be done with their permission, all that. Yeah. So anyway, Double O Duck is not something they wanted out there in the ether, especially Disney spending a lot of money on it, promoting it when they're trying to re-energize 007. So we lost the name, which is great, because the Spy Shush organization was already part of the show. And in my mind, it's like, well, yeah, that's how Darkwing can afford all this cool equipment. Although I don't think we ever expressed that, in an episode. Uh, anyway, we had a contest to name him. The winner of the contest was Alan Burnett, who came up with Darkwing, and that was the only good name. Everything else was trash. It wasn't like, well, of the top 5, I like this one best. It was like, no, that one, nothing. And I said, that's great. That's the character he thinks he is in his head. But let's put Duck on it.
Alan Burnett?
Alan Burnett.
The guy that wrote the Warner Brothers.
We say, let's put it this way. We warmed him up for the Dark Knight with the Duck Knight.
That's what. Okay, so oh my gosh, that's
it
so
is
cool.
That Alan Burnett, yeah.
Okay.
So he came up with Darkwing. I added on Duck to make it sillier, basically. Alan was there for a while, actually trying to develop a Darkwing feature because of the DuckTales feature, and then they decided to not do any of those because the DuckTales didn't make as much money as they had foreseen. Anyway, Alan then went to Warner Brothers and he retired from Warner Brothers a couple of years ago, having a hand in almost every superhero project.
I was going to say that same Alan Burnett. That's really cool.
Yeah. Alan was the story editor, I think, everybody knows Paul Dini as one of the key writers, but I think Alan was the story editor that they needed on that show because, Eric Radomski and certainly Bruce Timm were at the core of that project, the heart of that project, and they needed somebody who got it, and Alan got it, and helped start, get those early seasons out and recognize what they wanted to do. So yeah, that's how. But once freed of the spy name, spies are still part of it. But that's when I really tapped into the silly comics I grew up with, which were the Silver Age of comics, which were just, very little continuity, outrageous covers, and wacky story concepts. And the other thing I pitched was, I want this. It's got to have Disney heart, but I want the sensibilities and the action sensibilities of, old Warner Brothers and Disney shorts, that kind of wackiness. In fact, the first real pilot, everybody thinks of the pilot as the 2-parter that introduced the show. Mm-hmm. But the first script I wrote to show everybody, this is what I mean, and it was animated brilliantly by our Australian studio, was That Sinking Feeling, which was Professor Moriarty. And when you watch that episode, you realize every relationship is very clear in that episode. Everything we pitch, including Honker, which was the idea that he had a brain that could see relationships and all that, which we didn't, make the most out of. But he could basically set up dominoes to do this thing, that hit that thing, and then something falls across chasm that you could run across. Anyway, in the third act of that, we did, it was in a baseball stadium, and suddenly they were wearing baseball uniforms. We didn't explain where the uniforms came from. It was like, that's what old Bugs Bunny used to do. Suddenly he'd be, in a different costume or dressed in drag or whatever. And I'm sorry I didn't show that episode more to the crew, especially to the writers, because we did plenty of wacky stuff. And some of my favorite stuff is the things where we broke the kind of the idea of the show or the fourth wall and all that.
Yeah.
But that whole, I'm suddenly dressed as something else, that Roger Rabbit kind of feeling, I don't think we did enough of. So anyway, that's how the show came to be, and that's how we got the spirit. And it was just that loose feeling of continuity is why Darkwing has like 6 origins. And somebody like Negaduck, the first appearance of Negaduck was in an episode where Darkwing was split in 2, a good half and a bad half.
Yeah, there was.
And at the end of that, I said, I love Negaduck. We got to do more Negaduck. And the story editor said, how do we do that? It would be the same story every time, where he gets split into Posiduck. I said, no, I don't like Posiduck. Nobody likes Posiduck. It's Negaduck I want to bring back. And they said, how do we explain that? And my answer was, you don't. We never explained why the Joker was always on the loose when at the end of the issue, he was clearly locked up in Arkham, or in the Riddler and Mr. Freeze and all those guys. They would just be out, jumping on giant typewriters.
See, I always thought I missed an episode because of that.
No.
It
was just, and later on, and again, fans.
That's Silver Age storytelling. That you were channeling that.
Yeah. And you can, as a fan, you can go back and say, oh, well, he comes from the Negaverse. And
of course,
Negabolt didn't actually split Darkwing into two. It reached into two different dimensions, the good and the bad. And you didn't come up with anything. It's like people try to say, well, Darkwing's origin is obviously in high school when he was going to high school with Negabolt. I say, that's just because you like that episode more than the other episodes. It's like, we never said that was it. Because basically, Darkwing didn't have to have an origin of superpowers. I didn't want to show his parents being killed in an alleyway and pearls falling in slow motion, that kind of thing. It's just, he had a sense of justice and a huge ego that for some reason he felt like he was the guy who was going to clean up the city. We just were doing, it was like, you don't need an origin. You'll pick it up as we go along. If you had never seen how he adopted Gosalyn and he was just, had this daughter, you just watch the episode and say, oh, here's his daughter. Wow, she won't stay at home and she's crazy too. So that was the looseness, the fun of, again, the lack of continuity we have fun with.
So that show.
So again, a feature, not a bug.
that show lives in a lot of people's hearts. I mean, people now 30s and 40s and probably older too, 50s, and it's
I just had lunch yesterday with a guy from Azerbaijan who is, they want me to travel there to be part of this animation festival. Sadly, their next door neighbor is Iran and their other neighbor is Russia, and the two countries away is Ukraine. So it's like, Tad won't be traveling there. So I may be doing a Zoom thing, but he was telling me the same thing that, and I heard this when I was in Moscow before the pandemic, Darkwing, Rescue Rangers, and, a few other shows were the first cartoons those countries saw from the West. And it opened up this whole world of, wait, this isn't our lives. And yet this guy was saying Darkwing was a guy who was always in over his head and could face up to aggressors, and fight for justice. And that's something they wanted. It was like, strangely enough, it was like Darkwing Duck had a moral code. And then later on, parents wanted their kids to see the same cartoons for the same reasons. That it was kind of, I never thought of Darkwing as teaching lessons that way. But in matter of fact, that's what he was doing. Similarly, it wasn't until I retired and was gone to several conventions as a guest, where my first convention, I had, a couple of women get very emotional because they had rough childhoods because dad wasn't there or dad was terrible or whatever. And it was that bond between Darkwing and Gosalyn, which was intentional on our part. That was like an emotional anchor to them. So we were just trying to be funny. So, but that character, that show has stayed with a lot of people.
And you never know who you're going to reach with what kind of story either. I know that after the show, I think it lasted 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken.
But again, going back to it, when people say, well, there's this season, that season, technically there was one season of 65 episodes plus another 13. And then you could say there's a second season because ABC literally ordered a second season where everything else had been done and on the air. Mm-hmm. So to us, it was almost a continual production, although there was that one, the first batch came out all in the same year. But people divided up kind of arbitrarily to say syndication is first season, ABC is second season, even though they are on at the same time. And then the third season was also an ABC season.
Did you know about the comic books that were coming out at that time?
We knew, we saw them, mm-hmm. And the first one, where on the cover they forgot to color in his mask, and to my somewhat irritation, Dynamite decided to be accurate to the reprint and also printed him without the right color. It wasn't like we were talked about it or we were told about it ahead of time, but I was aware of it. It wasn't like I met with the people who'd be writing the comic. There was a small digest size, I think it was Disney Adventures, or maybe it was Disney Afternoon back then, whatever. They just did little short stories, and a couple of my storyboard artists actually did the artwork for those. So, or at least some of those stories. And so I don't think they're in the batch that Dynamite is reprinting, but I was aware of them because the guys were working on them. What I was not aware of, because I was deep into Agrabah and Aladdin and Genie and that group, was that Marvel put out a 10-issue series where for 3 of those issues, he was in a human world. It was like, they weren't even dog noses. They were humans that he was interacting with. So it's like, no one was given notes.
I love that you said dog noses, because
yeah.
That I remember. I think it was a realization through Don Rose's work in the Duck comics that Carl Barks had been doing that too. Originated.
Well, and Don Rosa was really talk about somebody who's all about continuity and faithfully accurate. I mean, a lot of his stories were in between Carl's stories, and fleshing them out. And he always set his stories, no matter when you asked him to write one, he would set it in the 50s. And that way the timeline still worked. When they did DuckTales 2017, they basically said, those adventures when he found the Fountain of Youth, he drank some. It was basically, there's like an episode of when I think Scrooge and Goldie are talking to each other, and each one had been in other dimensions or drinking a magic potion to basically explain the timeline works. They're just incredibly old. So even those guys were aware of it, but Don did magnificent stuff, and really kept faithful to the feeling of the originals. Actually, and it's not the same, but I was surprised when Dynamite put out 3 comics, Darkwing Duck, Nega Duck, and Justice Ducks. And Roger Langridge, who does the Justice Ducks, they were actually some of the last ones I read, and I loved them because most of them are one and dones. It's the story is in one issue, and it reminded me of the old Duck comics in that you get into the adventure, right away. There's laughs throughout all of it, and it just, there's plenty of action. I just love what he was doing with that. So I still haven't read the rest of the run. I keep saying to Dynamite, you can send me some more PDFs.
I've only read the Amanda's Darkwing, Amanda Deaver's Darkwing, and it was. I think
I found out it's actually Dybert from her.
Oh, Dybert, that's right.
German heritage.
I found that to be, I think, a love letter really to the way that you all would tell stories back then.
I thought she really captured the tone, especially with Morgana Macabre. I think I've said this publicly many times that, I would love to have hired her on the show at the time. Dev Ross was the writer who did the first Morgana story and really set a template that worked really actually better in the individual episodes than in the 2-parter where she was part of the Justice Ducks, because she was a little more unsure of herself in that. Amanda really got that. My only critique, frankly, of the Darkwing series, the early issues, which what I've seen, was more about format, that they kind of reduced the number of panels, where I always feel like you can be looser with that and pack in more story. So that's not really about Amanda. I think that's must have been an editorial decision, which is different in Justice Ducks. They pack in more and take more liberties with that stuff.
When you found out about this Kickstarter that Dynamite was going to do for these So there's 3 volumes, and I did leave a link in the description of the video where people can go and you can still pledge. Did you realize just how much Darkwing comics there were out there?
Like, I mean, I knew, again, when Boom put out their series,
yeah,
I knew those guys did a different thing. Now they took him to do modern version of Darkwing.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of left the Silver Age behind and embraced the modern age. So it was heavy continuity, and I thought they did a great job too. That they created their own world. I was always encouraging them to say, well, you can create villains too. You don't have to keep bringing the same guys back. But James Silvani is a maniac when it comes to panels and throwing in 100 characters and that sort of stuff. Anyway, so they did their run. Then the run was repeated into Joe Books, and for the most part, I liked a lot of the stuff. So I haven't read all of them. Some of the later ones I didn't, but they had so I was certainly aware of those, and then when Dynamite was going out, I heard about that online, so I definitely tracked down the previews to find out what it was about. And I have a pet peeve of basically not usually I don't give Disney money indirectly through their licensees for projects based on characters that I created. It's like, you could just send me some. Anyway, but it's like I had to, so I bought the first couple issues, and then I subscribed to get digital issues of all the Nega Ducks that Jeff Parker's done. Now he created all sorts of villains. They have all sorts of crazy panels in the artwork and all that. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that surprised me that it wasn't just one series. Let's see how it does. It's like they went out there and hit it big time to say, we're going to get in some name artists, do variant covers. We're going to, get some of the top writers working on the stuff. We're going to put out 3 series. So that was pretty cool.
I think the collection is really cool that they're doing all of those stories. I think, there was the Kaboom line whenever they were doing DuckTales and they were doing Rescue Rangers. There was actually a
crossover. Boom. There's a difference between Kaboom and Boom.
Oh, was it? Yeah, but wasn't Kaboom their kid line? Like the Boom line, I think they called it Kaboom. Because I still have those trades. Because like I said, I really love the Duck comics. Yeah. And there was a crossover between.
I thought it was a different company, although it makes sense that they would be connected, I guess.
It was really weird because it was an interesting time where there wasn't DuckTale comics nor Darkwing Duck. Fantagraphics was printing the classic Carl Barks and then eventually the Don Rosa stuff. And I assume Boom lost the license. And then there was another company called Joe Books, which picked up the license for Darkwing Duck.
Yeah.
And they printed, which some of the stuff is collected in this oversized hardcover collection that Dynamite is putting out. And then eventually Disney bought Marvel, and then people were like, well, does that mean that Marvel's now going to be doing Duck comics? I was getting all those questions, and at that time we were all unsure as to what was going to happen. And as it turns out, that they can still just pretty much let Fantagraphics is still doing the classic stuff, the classic Carl Barks, classic Don Rosa. Disney did have an Uncle Scrooge one shot and have like a what if
Wolverine... Didn't that just happen at Marvel?
Yeah, like that what if Wolverine was I'm sorry, what if Donald Duck had become
Donald Duck was Wolverine, yeah.
Yeah. So they're doing some things. I just find it really interesting, like all the different publishers.
When Disney sells a license, they aren't like, oh yeah, you do all the TV animation stuff. It is, oh no, we have the princess line. That character, she's a great character, but she's not one of the princesses, This character isn't called a princess in the movie, but we're going to pull her in anyway, and she's going to be in there. So they have their own rules that come from merchandising more than anything else. And then with the Ducks, it's Darkwing is a separate license than the classic characters for sure. And
Mhm.
usually, I believe it's also separate from DuckTales and Rescue Rangers. So you can make a deal of different sorts. So that's why one company can have the rights to reprint. I mean, basically, Disney is not shy about accepting checks from people. So, Fantagraphics pays
I
to
just
do reprints and all that. Usually,
yeah.
when you buy a license, part of the thing is you have the uh, ability to reprint previous things of that license. I don't know if that goes back to the Karl Barks for the Ducks, but like if Joe Books did it. I mean, Joe Books was
Yeah.
bought Darkwing, and they reprinted the Boom series.
Mhm.
So part of that is a cost saving thing. You're not paying for people to create new material. You still have to pay for the rights, and there's still obviously the cost of publishing and all that. But you could do that. I mean, you can come up with anything. Oh, we're going to put out a double-sized book, and at this price point, and there's going to be one new story and then a reprint in the back, or there's a lot of flexibility there. So, especially with Disney and Marvel, obviously there was a pitch, and I'm sure they talked through what you're allowed to do and what you can't do. Like, I don't think at this time Disney could do a what if Darkwing Duck was the Black Panther or something,
Well, my,
But
my
it's
my point was, I just want to see the collections come out. That's
yeah,
what I want to see. Sure. Do I want one publisher to find all? Okay, that might be easier, but I don't care at this point. I am so glad that Dynamite is putting out these particular stories, because this stuff is just going to be forgotten. If it wasn't
yeah,
like for Dynamite finding these particular titles, getting the getting the Darkwing license, a lot of those stories would have been forgotten to time. Like those
yeah.
trade paperbacks that we're talking about with Boom and Joe Books, gone. And let me tell you, that DuckTales tat, I'm sure you probably know, once it's out of print, it was going for insane amount of money. Like
Oh
in
yeah, the collection, the Joe Books collection.
yes,
What do they call it? Definitively
definitive
dangerous
collection. Yeah.
collection. Yeah, yeah. That goes for at least 300, maybe between 300 and 600. So
That to me
it's
is like
crazy. Yeah.
that's more expensive than the actual single issues that they were putting
Oh
out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I am so glad that they're doing this, and I know that they have you involved. Nick was really, but Nick Barucci, man, I love that guy. He was so excited to have you on board and to put all this together, and I think it's really cool, and it's going to make one heck of a collection, that's for sure. For
Yeah,
anybody
they
that
had me do. I did a cover for them for the Ash Can that'll, of a possible series coming up. That's part of the Kickstarter, and they
Mhm.
reached that level of Kickstarter that that happened. So
So
we'll see what the future brings.
are you where like I know after well okay so for you have stayed in animation, you've stayed your name is everywhere. I think my one of my best friends, she loves Bob's Burgers, and I think I saw your name pop up there as the your story animator, I think.
Just a storyboard artist.
Story, oh my gosh. And I
Yeah,
was like, oh, that's Ted Stones, that's the guy
yeah.
that did Darkwing Duck.
The
It's just
the show did drive me crazy. I mean, it was, thank God, funny. It was a hilarious show, but as a storyboard artist, it's like you can't add gags. It's
oh
totally, and it's a very locked down rules on how the camera should move. I had a sequence where Bob has been out all night and he's basically in the kitchen drunk, and they had to pull drawings out of my storyboards because it was more animated than the style of the show. So I was being restrained, um, and so you know but I got to see how that side of things worked, and then I went from there, and then while I was there, we did a pilot for Disney on Beverly Hills, Chihuahua. That didn't go ahead, but gorgeous looking pilot, and directed by uh, I'm just blanking on Jennifer's last name, and I want to say a certain name. I'm saying, no, you went to college with that person. Anyway, Jen's producer directed the Harley Quinn series that
That's a
everybody
little bit
loves.
different.
Yeah, it's way different from A Little Chihuahua Story. And actually, she's done way more action stuff than Jennifer Coyle. Anyway, Jen's done more action adventure stuff,
Oh,
really, than she loves doing little cute stuff. And I think that was the only project she got to do that way. But she was brilliant on the Harley Quinn stuff. So,
this is from
done
Ethan
everything.
saying, "Love Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. I would watch it after school religiously. Just wanted to say thank you. Hope it makes it on Disney Plus one day."
So do I. I mean, that is the I mean, I thought we did a great job on the series. But I assume Disney. There's only a couple of shows that Disney hasn't put on, and I assume there'd be kind of a rotation thing that every once in a while they bring in, and then it's like, oh, they're doing a Lightyear movie, so that's why they're not bringing it out. But we're still waiting. You know, we don't know what the story is there.
That's interesting that you're still waiting for that.
Yeah.
Now, are you
Now that might be a thing where fans always talk about petitions and all that, and usually those things don't lead to anything. But I suppose if you've got, you know, families who remember the show or want to share the thing, you know, writing in individually to their Disney Channel or, you know, Disney Plus, maybe something would happen there. But I don't know. You know, that was as close I got to do. I pitched a science fiction show right after Darkwing, and at that time they decided, no, we want less original stuff. We actually, because I had started in features, they wanted me to work on the Aladdin spinoff. And since that was done by friends of mine, I went and talked to them first. And I said to Ron and John, "Is this weird?" And, you know, they said, "No, it's a new deal. That's, you know, a sign of success." So that's how I got to Aladdin. Never got to do my science fiction show until Buzz, you know.
Do you think you still have stories to tell about Darkwing? Does that ever pop into your head? Like, whether in animation or in comic book format, like
you could, it's one of those things where, because it kind of approached me about doing that, and it's, if I said yes and had to take it seriously, I'm sure I'd get back in the groove. But that was so much fun back then because nobody was giving us notes, that we were, you know, able to do Twin Beaks. We could say, hey, you know, on this one, it's all these different people writing the scripts, and anybody who writes the script, that's the way the adventure goes. And look, they're hopping in and out of panels, and, you know, just total freedom. So, and, you know, I'm not prepared to have fans tell me I'm not writing Darkwing Duck the right way. And I don't know that, you know, I did a short story for Boom, actually, featuring Goslin, that James Silvani illustrated, and which he may be selling the original art from that soon, because he's trying to get this pirate project up and going. So if you're not following James Silvani or James Silvani art, start Googling and track him down and sign up for his pirate book. Anyway, you know what, if I was going to put that much energy into something, I'd kind of feel like, well, it should be an original project. But right now, it's weird. I kind of thought when I retired, oh, I'm going to play around with comic books and maybe self-publish some stuff. And then it was like my wife said, you can't stay in your office because it's very small. The office is not much. About this space behind me is not much more that way. It's very condensed. You know, you can't spend 18 hours a day in there. And I realized, well, yeah, I hadn't foreseen an end game. It was like I didn't give up a well-paying career in animation for a non-paying career in comics. And it is that kind of thing of like, wait a minute, because I tend to think in series, obviously. It's like, wait, what if it's successful? Then they'll want me to do more, and suddenly I'll have a job again, except they'll take up all my time, except I'm not really getting anything out of it. And what about this retirement thing I was supposed to do? So what I would love to do is, whether it's in comics or an animated show or whatever, I'd love to be, brought in to brainstorm or whatever. It's like, when Marvel and DC has their yearly retreats where they kind of say what everybody's doing and keep track of the characters, or they announce some overall big event that's going to ruin the storylines of all the writers. I would love to be in, if they're saying, okay, we're going to launch this kinds of stories for the Justice Ducks. One of the things I pitched in a lot of interviews was I would love to see each of the Justice Ducks have like a 6-issue limited story, because they could be entirely different. Morgana's supernatural story could be, what's the duck version of the Endless from Sandman? What's the duck version of all these more modern supernatural traits or supernatural TV shows or whatever? You could do a whole, we touched on Universal monster movies and, to some extent, H.P. Lovecraft, but there's so much richness there. And then you take the aquatic character Neptunian, she'd have an undersea adventure, and that could be entirely different. And Stigma is this kind of guy who ends up fighting crime without realizing he's doing it. It's more of a gag type book. So if they said, yeah, we're thinking of doing that, I would love to be in the room and just say, yeah, what about this? Or how could you do this? Oh, let me sketch this out. What if this was the character? So basically, I'd love to be in the brainstorming session and let other people do all the hard work to genius. So that I would love to be part of.
So you want to be part of the brain trust of
yeah, basically, and because I'm very open to realizing that if there's a reboot of Darkwing Duck, it's going to be a different thing, and it's like I can give notes to say, well, this is what was the core of the original show. It doesn't mean it's going to be the core of their show. It was like, how do you inspire a new piece of artwork or a new creative endeavor? You look at something, you're inspired by it. There's no point in just repeating what that was, which ironically, that's what a hardcore fan always wants. It's like, no, make it just like the other, just make it more episodes,
No,
in our show, they're all going to be kids or whatever,
Yeah.
It's like, it's one of those things where, is the end product entertaining? It's not. I thought the Chippendale movie was hilarious. It's not the same thing as the Adventures. It's not the same universe as the Adventures. They said, hey, what if that was a film and we're going to show the behind the scenes story, and the actors are going to get into their own adventure? That's a whole different thing. It doesn't change the adventures that, we animated back then. So I'm pretty good at letting go of all that stuff. And all I can say is, here's what I think you're missing that could help you out. Here's what I like about your story. Here's something you don't realize in animation, how much time you need to do certain things. I often quote George Lucas, who said the most expensive 2 words in any script is "they fight." Because and I was shown something on a project where these characters are going to sneak into a factory.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, your script is way too long. And they looked at page count. They said, no, we've looked at all sorts of scripts. I said, when they sneak into a factory, the director is going to want to play that out. They're going to be in the shadows, sneaking past people or knocking somebody out to go, look at it, any live action movie. That's the actual action of, sneaking in takes time. And sometimes when a writer who's got more live action credits comes in, it's a whole different world that they don't realize that, no, the artists are going to need time to set things up and play this out. So there's that kind of notes that I can give. I'm happy to do that. So we'll see what comes up.
This is from Clint. Having back the Kickstarter campaign, I'm looking forward to an introduction into the world of Darkwing Duck. Love the interviews you're doing. What I know we're about to wrap up, but what for somebody that hasn't ever read Darkwing, how would you pitch it to somebody that just reads comics, has
To
never
me, it's
read?
just like, to me, it was, I'd have to talk about the original show to basically say it's a shadow Batman type character who has a colossal ego and is usually not successful until that ego gets out of his way. And it asked the question, what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay at home? That's his daughter, who's as wild and as crazier than he is. And, it's the story of a father and a daughter in a launch pad.
I love that you threw a launch pad.
Yeah. Oh, he was part of it. That's literally a quote from Frank Aragonis, who
Mhm.
was the co-producer on DuckTales 2017, who was Darkwing Duck 3 years in a row on in Halloween as a little kid. Got out of doing a book report by doing a episode of Darkwing Duck as his report. Frank loves Darkwing, and in my first time visiting the crew of DuckTales, and we started talking about Darkwing, and I said, really, the daughter is very important. And that's was a quote from Frank saying, "Oh, Tad, we know it's the story of a father and a daughter on a launch pad." I said, "This guy knows what he's doing."
It's in good hands. It's in good hands.
But basically, it's if you're doing it right, anybody can pick up an issue of the comic, and you immediately get what's going on. Which is how we all used to collect comics. It wasn't like, I never looked at the number in the corner of a Superman comic thinking, oh, it's 200 issues. I have to start at number one. Where am I going? Well, number one came out in 1938. I'm not going to find that issue. But, oh, he's got superpowers. And this is a villain. And that's all you need. You pick it up, and he's a reporter in disguise. And this reporter, for some reason, out of the millions of people in the city, thinks he's Superman or is always going to try to prove it. You just dive in. And I still think that's true of almost all comics today. If you have a lot of questions, they're either answered in that issue, a previous issue, or you look up an older, one online. But just dive in, have some fun with comics.
I want to say thank you again for your time. Thank you for all those memories as a kid, for not just for me, my brothers, but all these people that are in the chat that'll be watching this later. You created a lot of great memories, and a good reason to stay home and not just run outside. Now, before I leave you, though, before we go, I do want to talk about. I'm going to highlight you if you don't mind, because I have been looking the whole time over your shoulder. Those figures over your yes. Where can you tell us a little bit about them?
These were sculpted by Kenny Tompkins, who was our character designer on the show. Mm-hmm. And he was getting into sculpting and hooked up with a guy who knew how to do molds and resin pouring, and basically did these maquettes. It's not like they were done official, like at Features used to do maquettes and they were given to the key animators so that they can actually look at it from different angles. This was more for fun. And, he said, well, if you want one, it's going to cost this much money. Anyway, he did these, and I have one of the few complete sets. I kicked myself because Kenny, years later, did a launch pad out of Sculpey and wanted to give it to me. And I didn't take it because I said, no, you should make a mold out of it because everybody's going to want one and all that. And he was trying to tell me that I don't know that guy anymore. That guy doesn't do it anymore. So I missed out my chance of having an actual launch pad in the style of the show, which was obviously way different than the DuckTales launch pad.
Yeah, those are so cool. I've been.
Yeah. And by the way, that's my Darkwing Duck wall.
Oh, now
over here.
We didn't even get a chance to talk about Hellboy. Oh my gosh, you have original pieces?
Oh yeah. I also have one on the other wall over here.
That was your big well, I mean, other than Darkwing, I think that was the other big project that you did. So how about this? How about you come back anytime you want to, and we can talk about Hellboy next.
Sure.
Because I have enjoyed talking to you. I feel like there were a lot of things that you shared that I've always been curious about, how, things get started and how it turns into animation, the inspiration. But I would love, I've got your contact info. I'd love to talk to you about that aspect of things, the Hellboy stuff.
Sure.
Because it's not, I mean, it's not dark and gritty, but it's different than the Disney stuff that you.
Well, it's like, I mean, Hellboy was fantastic project for me in that I was able to, we always write for ourselves in terms of the comedy we did. We didn't say, oh no, that's too smart for kids. No, it's like, we wanted to entertain ourselves. We laughed at the stuff we thought was working and all of that. But Hellboy was a chance to, especially the second one, it wasn't that Scooby-Doo level of where they had to say, where it looks creepy and oh, Scooby, we're going into a haunted house. Whoa, instead it's a normal house, and then creepy things happen. And so we did things that would be creepy in a live action film. And, I just enjoyed doing that. The first one was kind of a tribute to the short stories Mike used to do with Hellboy, and still does from time to time. And that's how, in the early days, when you're reading Hellboy as it was coming out, they weren't all the continued stories. You'd get these little short stories, here and there. The second one was more about Hellboy's roots in Central Europe. There's vampires and werewolves and, harpies and a lot of different kind of creepiness. The third one, which we didn't get to do, but it was written, was the mad scientist Nazi side of Hellboy, where it was going to be, cybernetic apes and floating heads in jars and just all that, Bride of Frankenstein kind of background to this, wild adventure. So each one was going to have a different feeling. But yeah, I love those two films. We had a lot of fun with it. And Mike's about to come out with a new Hellboy movie. You've probably seen the trailers.
Yeah, from San Diego.
That's what YouTube's for. Yeah, and I got to say, that's the first Hellboy movie trailer that looks scary. I mean, we tried in animation. We had some good trailers, but where Del Toro had this grand giant version, these are like smaller. This is a smaller story, and it's the one, according to Mike, is the most accurate. Well, he co-wrote the script, I think. Is the most accurate to his world and it's the stories he wrote.
From what I saw, it looks like the Crooked Man story with the.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
It looks pretty.
In fact,
cool.
I won't. I'm tempted, but I said, you know what? I'm not going to go back and reread that because I've forgotten enough of it that I want to save it.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah. But yeah, I'm curious about the movie too. I just want to thank you for your time, sir. I want to thank everybody for joining.
You're welcome.
Thank you to Vincent from Dynamite. Thank you to Nick for setting up the interview. And yes, absolutely come back. Maybe if you don't need a reason to, you know what? You just come back anytime you want to. Talk to me about Hellboy, because I am genuinely curious about that journey and how that got started and where it would have gotten if there were more Hellboy movies of the ones that you worked on. But thank you so much for being here, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. In the link in the description is where I have left the Kickstarters. If you want to go and kickstart that, there are different tiers for those books. There's a deluxe edition and a trade paperback version, but those are coming out from Dynamite. And thank you, Tad. Before you go, what are you working on next? Is there something that you can tell us what you're working on, where people can find you?
No, I'm pre-pandemic. I used to be in conventions as a guest, and then I got to go to the Netherlands. I got to go to Moscow. When I started dipping my toe back in, I've yet to hear back from conventions. So if there's a convention near you that's like more than a one-day convention, let them know that you'd want to have me as a guest, because that would be cool. It just gets me out of the house. So other than that, the only thing coming up is Disney is going to update me on where they are with the Darkwing Duck reboot. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, wonderful. Love hearing that. And that's it, everybody. Go and enjoy your afternoon. And Mr. Stones, you as well. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
All right.